When we think of Jesus teaching his disciples how to pray, most of us immediately recall the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father, who art in heaven." But was there more to it than just words? Some traditions and sources suggest that Jesus may have used or implied specific hand gestures in prayer. So what does the Bible really say about it? Did Jesus actually teach his disciples to pray using their hands in symbolic ways? Or is this a later tradition with no biblical basis? Let's begin with what we know for sure. In Luke 11:1, one of the disciples asks Jesus, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples." Jesus responds not with hand gestures, but with words, a deeply meaningful and structured prayer. This passage, along with Matthew 6:9-13, gives us the model prayer that became known as the Lord's Prayer. It focuses on reverence, submission to God's will, forgiveness, provision, and spiritual protection. But there's no mention of Jesus instructing them on posture or hand movements. However, in biblical times, posture and body language in prayer were deeply significant. While Scripture doesn't say that Jesus gave his disciples hand gesture instructions, it does show that raising hands, kneeling, and bowing were commonly practiced by devout Jews and early believers. For instance, Psalm 141:2 says, "Let my prayer be set before you as incense, the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice." Similarly, in 1 Timothy 2:8, Paul writes, "I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling." These gestures were signs of surrender, humility, and spiritual openness. Lifting hands was a physical expression of dependence on God. Bowing symbolized reverence, and kneeling reflected submission. While these weren't required formulas, they were part of the prayer culture in Israel, and Jesus, as a devout Jew, would have participated in such practices. Though the Gospels do not record Jesus using specific hand gestures to teach prayer, they do show him modeling physical postures in his own prayer life. In Luke 22:41, before his arrest, Jesus knelt down and prayed. In John 17, Jesus lifted up his eyes to heaven as he interceded for his disciples. These details highlight a physical engagement. In prayer, Jesus didn't just pray with his mouth, but with his whole body. As early Christianity spread, some traditions began to develop more structured ways of praying, including symbolic hand gestures. For example, by the 2nd and 3rd centuries, early Christians adopted the Orn's position, standing with arms raised, as a posture of prayer. Ancient Christian artwork often depicts believers, and even Mary, in this pose. Some traditions even use specific finger positions to represent the Trinity or to bless others. But these traditions likely emerged after the time of Jesus as the church developed liturgical practices. There is no biblical record that Jesus instructed his followers to use particular hand gestures in a mystical or symbolic sense. His focus was always on the heart posture, not just the physical one. In fact, in Matthew 6:25-6, Jesus warns against making a public show of prayer, saying, "When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." His emphasis was on authenticity, not performance. That said, it's important not to dismiss physical expressions of faith. In many cultures, including Jewish and early Christian, sabbath was part of worship. Kneeling, raising hands, bowing, and even laying prostrate were ways of aligning the physical body with spiritual submission. These actions were not just rituals, they were heartfelt responses to the majesty and presence of God. Some modern Christian traditions do use hand gestures in prayer, such as crossing oneself, opening palms upward, or folding hands. These can be meaningful expressions of worship when done sincerely. But according to Scripture, there is no record that Jesus prescribed these or required them. His command was clear: "Pray then, like this." And what followed were words that reflected relationship with God, not rules about movement. So where does the idea of Jesus teaching hand gestures come from? It likely stems from later mystical traditions, such as certain Gnostic or esoteric groups who blended Christian ideas with symbolic rituals. Some ancient texts, not included in the Bible, mention secret gestures or sacred movements. But these are not considered authoritative scripture. They offer insight into how some groups practiced spirituality, but should not be confused with the teachings of Jesus found in the Gospels. In summary, the Bible shows that Jesus taught his disciples how to pray with sincerity, humility, and reverence, not with prescribed hand gestures. Physical expressions, like kneeling, lifting hands, or bowing were, and still are, meaningful parts of prayer, but they were not commanded as formulas. What mattered most to Jesus was the condition of the heart. He wanted his disciples to approach the Father with trust, surrender, and faith, not with theatrics or ritual performance. So while it may be spiritually enriching to pray with hands raised or palms open, the real power of prayer lies not in your fingers, but in your faith. Jesus didn't teach mystical hand signs, he taught intimacy with God. And that's something we can all access anytime, with hearts turned toward heaven.